The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, good day to you all. Thanks for joining today. My name is Carl Holt and I'm part of the technical enablement team here at Progress Software. So today we're going to be covering Progress LoadMaster, which is the load balancing solution that can be used in a variety of different verticals, but we're going to focus today on public sector scenarios with LoadMaster. Okay, so as I said, my name's Carl Holt. You can see my contact details there. Just in terms of tenureship, I've been in the LoadMaster seat or Kemp seat for around about 13 years now, as of the end of this week. My role is primarily pre-sales, but I've got a technical brain with a commercial mind, and I can see where these things fit into those opportunities. So I would urge you to, and feel free to reach out to me if there's any burning questions or if there's things that we don't cover today that you do want to go through. And we're going to spend the next 40 minutes or so just covering a high-level view of the LoadMaster in conjunction with the market segment that we're covering today. So just in terms of progress, and just to frame things up before I drill into the LoadMaster side of things, and Progress has been going for just over 40 years now, and back in the day it was a relational database that the company was born from. But in the last several years, there's been several acquisitions, Kemp included here, as part of that. And you can see in this particular side of the house, there's three areas of Progress in its entirety, but there's infrastructure management as the house that we live in, and ultimately that covers things like Progress Chef, which is an automation and orchestration tool set. And in the DevOps world, we also have Progress What's Up Gold, which is part of the IP or Upswitch acquisition several years back, and that's for monitoring and network visibility in terms of things up, down, indifferent. And then we have Progress Flowmon, which we've done a session on recently as well for public sector, and that covers things like network performance, network detection and response, so the ransomware warning systems, and ultimately looking at things like performance. But today, again, the focus is the enterprise grade load balancing solution from Progress Kemp and the LoadMaster piece. So I'll give you a view of LoadMaster in its entirety, just to give you a snapshot of what's in the solution, and hopefully today, and if there's any opportunities to engage post this, we will reach out to you as part of that follow-up and make sure that you take away from what it is that you need from today's session. So I'm just going to ask a quick question, and no trick question, no wrong answers here as such. But in terms of what is a LoadMaster, from a Kemp or a Progress point of view, it is the load balancer here. But in essence, the LoadMaster was the guy that's throwing the cases underneath the planes when we're off on our jollies or traveling with work. And they are the guys that are responsible for loading and unloading the cargo in an eligible state, that it means that the experience of that flight isn't uncomfortable, and it's not going to cause any security or stability issues. And whether that's a vehicle, whether it's a boat, whether it's an aircraft, these guys are responsible for the pre-planning and correct placement. So they're looking at the maths of the placement of all of these loads, particularly on the airplane. And you can see on the right hand side at the bottom there, the Swissport guy with the LoadMaster jacket on. That is actually one of my personal photographs from a recent trip to Cyprus, where and it must have been a new issue of some uniform that month, and I've not seen it on the back on all of my travels up until then. So it just goes to show that there is plenty of space in this for these acronyms, but we're there to provide that comfortable user experience, maintain safety and security, and make sure that things perform as they see fit. So hold that thought for now, and we'll cover a few more bits in this space through the session today. So in terms of LoadMaster, from a Progress point of view, it is a high-performance application delivery controller, or ADC, and load balancer, ADC, reverse proxy, they're all pretty much one in the same thing, give or take some of the features and functions, but labeled as an ADC, fully featured with security, with networking, with all of the other things that you'll see today. and the load balancer that enhances availability, scalability, and security. And I'll show you why these are important to organizations today. So just in terms of who are we doing this for, our smallest customer is around about 25 users in the UK with a handful of servers in a hedge fund company running SQL databases and web. Our largest company or largest customer that we have is 1.7 million users and counting in a US organization. Everything else in between, every vertical, every other market in between. So safe to say that we've got a long established presence in the market across all of those verticals and horizontals, and safe to say that we have a solution and an opportunity to work with you to see what are the opportunities to engage and use these experiences as to making sure that we can solve those problems for you. So you see a list of names synonymous with those household brands, and in some cases not on the page, but also some extensive technology ecosystem partnerships as well. So our load balancer is a choice-based solution that's ingrained into the heart of a variety of different vendors that choose us for their preferred solutions in a variety of capacities, whether that's application centric, whether it's storage centric, or whether it's just in general a recommendation. So we've got a finger on that pulse there, and just in terms of the folks that are out there that look at these sort of marketing and analyst type briefings, we've been rated as #1 based on our application experience platform in things like Gartner Peer Insights. And these are the things that drive, one, the awareness forward, and two, the adoption through and through those sort of third-party unbiased reviews. So I would urge you to look at those if you get the chance. So just in terms of the what and the where and the why, and why are we relevant in this space? When you think about yourselves as customers, consumers of all things networks, all things application, you want to make sure that whatever you're publishing, whatever you're feeding out to the user space here, whether that's internal or external users within the corporation or enterprise, or whether that is into the, let's say, for example, into areas where consumers of those services are coming from external sources, so third-party access to these applications. What you want to make sure is that it's published securely, it's also published effectively to scale and accept those connections from those users. So the positioning of the load balancer is always important, and it's always alongside or just in front of those application servers that you see at the bottom part of the slide there. And we are the gateway into that network then, so through the firewall into the load balancer, then into the heart of those application servers. And whether that's in a DMZ, whether it's in an internal network, or even in a cloud-facing scenario, we have the capacity to publish those applications. And you'll see on there, in terms of some of the sort of public sector applications, things like SharePoint, Exchange back in the day as well. I know things have changed and moved on a little, but for those folks that still have on-premises Exchange, even things like Microsoft applications for things like Office 365, ADFS, there's still an opportunity to integrate load balancing into some of those applications to help support those things. So for example, in an Office 365 environment, you still may need to load balance the ADFS servers, because if I can't get to them, I can't get to Office 365 typically and traditionally. And couple that with things like VDI, it could also be some of the education platforms as well, like Blackboard or Moodle. And there's no stone unturned. We've got in excess of 100,000 deployments across a variety of workloads and applications to note. So just in terms of why application delivery is required, there's 5 key areas here that I want to cover just briefly in their entirety. When you look at what the customer wants and needs are, and having spent the best part of my career in consultancy and advice and advising customers as to what to choose and when, my role has been to look at these sort of key features, key functions of the solution, and tailor these solutions to what those customer wants and needs are. So in some cases, the load balancer has been used to provide some high availability cross sites. And it may not be that they have multiple servers in multiple sites, but they may have a server in site A, server in site B, and they want some high availability between those and direction of user to a performance site. So, and thinking about these out loud, we don't always need to have every tick box selected here, but from a business continuity, disaster recovery, capacity planning, and any of these headings that you see here, and the LoadMaster can be aligned and assigned to help with those needs and wants from the organization. So if you have an availability issue where we're making sure that we fail those resources over in the event of an application failing, absolute check in the box, whether that's done at GSLB layer, which is global site or server load balancing, or whether that's done in conjunction with a pool of resources that, let's say a percentage of those resources become unavailable and therefore I want to direct users to a different site, we absolutely can. There's then the scalability of the operations. We can add or remove applications statically or dynamically. So for customers that want to make use of, let's say, for example, peak periods in the calendar year, let's say a peak holiday, or exam timetables for terms and stuff, and at the end of that term, towards the end of the summer, when all of those exams are in play and we need more demands for those services and resources to meet those urgent needs, but then need to scale them back afterwards, leveraging the load balancers help bring those into play would absolutely be a fit for purpose use case here. Couple that with security and to be able to authenticate users and protect applications against attack for a variety of reasons, and being able to have a zero trust posture as well as a web application firewall posture as well in the heart of this means that we can protect and secure those applications even when there's multiple servers, multiple services in play here. And the performance, we can offload certain aspects of key functions here to the load balancer. That means that things like SSL and TLS offloading can be handled by the load balancer. That means that the burdens that these generally present to servers and the applications are left to us rather than to them. And the predictable performance, because of our capability to accelerate those types of traffic profiles, give us that little bit more viability in these type of scenarios. Couple that with things like control as well, and we're looking at the application resource, looking at the availability, the health and the performance, and we're making better decisions in steering those users and those requests to those servers for fulfillment of the services that are needed. On the right hand side of this slide, you can see a variety of different functions and features of the technology, which we won't go into today. But ultimately, these form the key functions of any load balancer. So anything less than this, you would be potentially in a potential for compromise, i.e. Not as feature rich, not as functional, and ultimately you would potentially miss the opportunity to deliver, one, a world-class solution, two, that's fit for purpose, three, that is fully supported across a wide variety of applications and features to note. In general, and the product portfolio, just to touch on some of this, because I think this is important, and given the fact that we've spent a lot of time evolving our product portfolio over the years, we are a force to be reckoned with in terms of our footprint and for on-premises, hybrid and cloud-facing scenarios, and our portfolio covers a variety of different platforms and footprints here. So dependent upon what it is that you're trying to publish and where that's being published, load balancing is going to absolutely form an essential requirement for these workloads. And vendors and household brands like Microsoft, for example, over the years have highly recommended the LoadMaster as a product of choice for a variety of different workloads in their space, as an example. And Dell also do the same for their object storage platform for both ECS and for PowerScale, and to a degree. And ECS is an absolute given and ingrained. We are in the heart of a lot of those opportunities. So scalability in terms of storage, scalability and publishing and security of applications and workloads across the board, and for all things VDI, web, and plus a variety of other workloads to note. If it is that it's, if you can't see it on the website through our workload guides and our white papers and whatever else, feel free to reach out to me and the team, and we'll certainly give you a steer on what we know. Just in terms of channel fulfillment as well, we are a two-tier channel model, so we work through our distribution and partner networks to fulfill this. And we have virtual load balancers in the Hyper-V, VMware, Oracle KVM, Zen spaces, and we've even got customers that have deployed us on Nutanix as an example, and because of the genetic makeup of a virtual load balancer being able to be imported there as well. The cloud load balancers, typical sort of preferred cloud facing scenarios here, so Azure, AWS, GCP, and the hardware load balancers, typically we have a hardware footprint that scales from around about and 1 gigabit throughput all the way up to 90 gigabits per second. So again, no stone unturned. Don't think that your organization is too small, medium, or large to avail of a Progress solution. If it is that you wanted to try something along these lines and you've got no familiarity of the Kemp brand as well, or the Progress Kemp LoadMaster, you can try this for free under no obligation for 30 days using our virtual LoadMaster that you can click on kemp.ax/try for that free trial. So as I've mentioned, and in terms of the appliances, it is a physical, common off-the-shelf type scenario here. And depending upon which model you choose, there are a variety of models that fit networking speeds and feeds from 1 to 10 to 25 to 40 gig networking, all the way up to 100 gig network speeds and feeds. And the hardware appliances, as it states there, they scale from 1 to 90 gig applicable to the overall platform. And in terms of the virtual appliances, they will scale dependent upon which route you take. There's service provider licensing, there's also pooled licensing, as well as the standard sort of virtual appliances, and again, a variety of different sizes of those licenses as well. Perpetual, subscription, pooled, pay-as-you-go, service provider is all available through our channels, and pooled licensing is one of the new uplifted opportunities where you can take a pool of bandwidth. You can then carve that up as you see fit into a number of licenses across the estate. So if you don't know how many load balancers you need and you want to sort of pay a fixed fee, but then chop and change those sizes as you see fit, pooled licensing may be one route, or alternatively, the pay-as-you-go stroke service provider licensing may give you that autonomy too in those spaces. So just as a portfolio within a portfolio, what's inside the box inside LoadMaster? And not all load balancers are equal, and most load balancers in our space tend to have the majority of similar features, similar functions. But we do have a couple of differentiators to note that when it comes to things like remote management, monitoring, and that fleet management service sort of thing that can be integrated into a LoadMaster estate. LoadMaster 360 is exactly that. So we look at how do we carve up those applications, those workloads, and make them an asset to the business that we monitor, manage, and provide those insights on. LoadMaster 360 can deliver that. We then have server and global server load balancing. So server load balancing is layer 4 to layer 7. Global server load balancing, and as the name indicates, it's more of a DNS overlay here that will look at a DNS request and it will point the user at a performance site in the advent of those applications being available. In the advent of something failing, DNS will get taken care of in terms of the resolution, and they will get pointed at a different site in that event. Things like the server load balancing, layer 4 through layer 7, most of our customers in this space choose layer 7 because they're doing some additional inspection, they're wanting a lot more granular health checks, they're doing things like web application firewall that you can see there as well on top of that layered security. So all of these things that are in the portfolio you would expect as an industry standard, and it is there. And again, from a competitive point of view, there are a lot of other load balancers out there with larger price tags that we can compete and contrast with that make sure that you're not burning budget where it's not needed. We can give you a cost-effective solution that's fit for purpose across the board, whether that's a small entity looking at load balancing the small number of services or servers, all the way up to high-end enterprise networking across the globe. The Edge Security Pack is, effectively what we classed penned back in the day as a TMG replacement function. So for those folks that want to publish and proxy those web applications to the outside world, providing some form of pre-authentication and single sign-on, and in the heart of the LoadMaster here, we can do that and couple that with the layer 7 load balancing features and things like the WAF. And TMG and UAG are covered, mostly in their entirety for those type of functions too. So why are we relevant in this space? And what I would say here is the simplification of the deployment in terms of how long should it take, or how long would it take to deploy these load balancers. And this isn't just from me being in this seat for a long period of time and being able to streamline and slicken up my skills to be able to deploy them quickly. This is our customers saying it used to take me 3 to 5 days to deploy the likes of F5, A10, Citrix, because they're complex beasts in terms of features and functions and networking. We've kept our proposition really simple in terms of deployment. It's a web user interface, it's simple, it's easy to understand, it's easy to manage, and more often than not, once our customers have deployed us in the past, I don't want to say this out loud, but we become something that is, it's put in a position where it's fitted into the network and it's installed in the heart of those applications. And unless anything changes, most of our customers say, oh, it's great, we don't need to touch it, we don't need to do anything other than firmware upgrades and the occasional updates here and there, and it just works. So, and don't take my word for it, we can certainly plug you into folks that will extol those values as well. When it comes to simplifying those deployments as well, we've got the deployment guides, we've also got the templates, and this will help you reduce those deployments down from days, in some cases down to hours, and in some cases even minutes if the familiarity is there. As I said, I mentioned templates. Those templates are free of charge, easy to use. You can get these from our website, and there is a link in the presentation that we'll share with you. Those templates give you the ability to freely download whatever the application is that's assigned to those particular vendor-specific verticals. So, for example, in Microsoft, you'll find things like SharePoint, and you'll find things like Exchange and ADFS. In VMware, you may find Horizon View, even though it's it lives in a different world now. And Horizon View as part of the VDI template, pretty standard, pretty straightforward stuff. It's a reverse proxy or a publishing proxy in a DMZ, which is one set of rules and content. On the internal side, it might be, and it's doing some pre-auth or whatever. There's a variety of different templates in here that you can lift and extract from these templates to pull them into the load balancer to make sure that whatever you deploy, one is either deployed based on a best practice standard, or it will give you the 9/10 to be able to chop and change and make those modifications as you see fit according to the business needs. So things like the other services that you see there, particularly in things like education and healthcare, these might be public sector specific applications that we've worked with partners and the folks that are deploying this, because they're doing this on a regular basis. So applications that you see fit in the education and healthcare space that may fit into your public sector that you work in, that may not be there, come to me, we'll work with you to be able to define a workload guide and get those templates defined and delivered up to the website as well. So there's always that appetite to be able to make this simpler as you start to repeat these sort of things on a regular basis. Okay, so I want to touch on a few use cases and as we go through this, and this is all about thinking about what problems we've solved over the years with the role of the LoadMaster, and in the majority of these problems, I would say that this covers a variety of different workloads, a variety of different business needs, but ultimately I've just taken a few key areas of interest where a particular corporation, organization, enterprise had a problem, and we've been able to leverage that issue and provide a solution as a result of our inclusion in this. So all of the verticals, the use cases, etc., and in terms of public sector, you can see that we cover the majority of those areas that you would expect. And again, I would urge you to take a look at these use cases, see what aligns to what you've got, and ultimately, how can we make a difference in solving those challenges that you would have in terms of those wants and needs within the business. So there's a few use cases in terms of high level before I get into a few weeds of additional use cases. For you guys that are on the call today, and for those folks that are listening after the event today, if you've got multiple data centers physically or virtually, and then you need to simplify those those entities where I want a single namespace for those applications and then provide some failover and traffic distribution across the sites without having to go into manage DNS or making those changes and waiting for things to propagate. And Progress LoadMaster really helps with those type of deployments. So very simple, straightforward proposition, but really effective when it comes to distributing those loads. There's also the intelligent proxy for functions, and this is a reverse proxy function. So we're optimizing traffic. We're also optimizing things like S3 as an example in the storage world, and providing things like multi-network deployments, providing IPv4 and v6 cohabitation, and quality of service controls as well. So, some of these sort of lumpy and clumpy applications where there's a lot of bandwidth needed to go and service those requests, these sort of things come into their own, because IPv4 and v6 aren't always supported across these applications, but also the ability to fine-tune those noisy neighbors so that they're not swamping the network built into these virtual services within the load balancer means that we can deliver a service that's really sets us apart. There's some things like granular access control. I'm going to touch on this a little later on, but ultimately, if I look at a network segment being carved up into several different types of users, who do I want to limit or restrict access to which services and why? And it may be that they're sat in a different part of the network, and ultimately, I'd only want to publish and open up certain aspects of that application to that particular user in that segment, and in some cases not. So we can add or remove access to those type of users. The beauty of the load balancer as well, we can also provide some certificate management with some built-in functionality that means that the enrollment and re-enrollment of those certificates can be automated, so that in the advent of a certificate reaching and almost its expiry and its sell-by date, and that broken certificate because of some lack of visibility or somebody's forgot to renew the certificate, and we can use the load balancer as part of that process to re-enroll a new certificate. Just in terms of the other use cases as well, high level, and provide some application resilience in performance, and provide application protection and access control, and enable customers to avail of multi or even the hybrid scenarios where I've got some of my network infrastructure in an on-premises scenario today, and I've moved to a cloud-facing scenario, but I want the same features, same functions in terms of features, support, and everything else, and familiarity. Or can I leverage this in multi-cloud applications, such as having some load balancing requirements in AWS, and leveraging a proposition inside Microsoft Azure as an example, so that I've got an alternative, and so that in the event of a disaster plan and capacity and whatever else, I'm leveraging those other two mediums here to make sure that I don't have a single point of failure or a single alliance to one particular cloud vendor as an example. These are all things that we can help facilitate through the role of the load balancer by keeping those applications always on, always available, and centric to the user. So just a little further in terms of resilience in performance, we can scale and maintain those applications and requirements around things like redundancy, making sure that the health checks are apparent right down to layer 7. Layer 7 health checks are the best scenario here. If I can see the application and I can see how it's performant, or in some cases not, I can make a better decision here. And so in the advent of, let's say, for example, a layer 3 or layer 4 health check, if I'm just looking at the network card on the machine to say, is it still available? And in some of these rudimentary health checks that are in other vendors of choice, it may be that those load tests or those those application health checks aren't actually that good when it comes to making good decisions in terms of making sure that the business and the application can continue. Let's say, for example, if I only did a ping health check to say is it still there, but the application has failed, an ICMP is still going to think it's still there. So therefore, the better quality the health check, the better quality the outcome in terms of keeping those applications on. And in the event of that application failing, the load balancer can then load balance traffic across multiple servers, sites, geographies as configured. The other thing that we can use here is some performance enhancements, and whether that's scalability in terms of performance needing more bandwidth capacity, more SSL offloading, more this, more that. We've got that as a given, but also under the hood we can compress and cache content. So compression means we're just getting more into less space, and the caching is meaning that we're getting less chattiness around the applications and serving content that we've seen before from that cached content using a proportion of memory allocated to the load balancers for that caching content. The other thing that really helps with a lot of these applications is the ability to offload and remove those encryption overheads from servers, or even provide encryption because those services at the back end may not be encrypted. Therefore, that big upheaval to get them to standards where we can maintain some form of compliance, leveraging the load balancer to use the load balancer for SSL offloading between the client request on the external side of the load balancer, and whether that's internal or external or otherwise, we can create that secure communication channel between the load balancer and the client, and then leave traffic in the clear, or even re-encrypt the traffic if needed. So, and we can certainly be leveraged for use cases. And again, one of them that I can think about off the top of my head here, there's a merger inside an NHS organization. Those single sites became 3 or 4 sites, and in one of those sites they had to publish an application that needed to be HTTPS. 20 or 30 servers later, and a lot of upheaval to get them to that point, we just leveraged the load balancer to terminate SSL on the front end, but HTTP at the back end, and the problem went away. They could still maintain compliance, they could still restrict which SSL profiles and TLS profiles were in play, but it ultimately resulted in a very simple, straightforward strategy there. Just in terms of the high availability and scaling piece as well, just to touch on this a little deeper, and high availability, what is it? It's 2 of the same thing, running the same thing, that if one fails, we can provide some redundancy, correct? Okay, Carl, that's one great use case. But high availability can also be leveraged to scale linearly across a multitude of load balancers. So effectively, we can use DNS to load balance the load balancers here. And the example here would be for a storage platform such as ECS. High throughput, high requirements in terms of scalability, and the overall demands of what the need is here. And what we can do is to leverage an ability to load balance those load balancers. So we make a decision based on performance and availability of those servers, i.e. the load balancers, and then we divert those connection requests to the storage in this case. And those mappings of DNS, it's a single namespace here, it's s3.carl.com, pointing at 4 load balancers, pointing at 8 storage nodes, and whatever is available at any given time, I know I can scale accordingly or scale back. And in the event that I want to increase more storage because I need more storage nodes for better performance, better or higher amounts of storage, and if I add more storage, I can bring those into the array just by adding them to the load balancer configuration. If I then need more capacity, that's going to be a combination of storage and load balancers, and we can scale linearly for that so that we can span across those networks. So use case 4, zero trust as well. So for anybody that's paranoid about who's accessing my application, what are they doing and where, and zero trust is a great initiative. But when we're looking at trusted versus untrusted users, what we want to make sure is what are we trying to prevent, or what are we trying to prevail here? And controlling which applications trusted and even untrusted users gain access to is one thing, but being able to do this simply and across the board, across a multitude of applications, becomes a whole new game, especially for those folks that are needing to maintain this type of posture. And least privileges, resource-specific access controls, group membership, and tied into things like Active Directory and single sign-on, so that the same username and password can be used across a multitude of applications and workloads. And safe to say that we've got that in the bag, checkbox exercise, tick in the box. We can also provide pre-authentication and single sign-on, and so those single sign-on credentials can be used, one to make sure that the user is who they say they are, and whether that's in conjunction with things like multi-factor or two-factor authentication, and we can control who's gaining access to that and provide some audit capabilities for that, and use those same credentials to log in across multiple applications so that the user experience is maintained. The other thing that we can do, as I mentioned, there's the web application firewall to secure against any application-specific vulnerabilities. So this is looking at a core rule set of rules and algorithms that are in place to see, and one is the traffic that's coming through the load balancer in its entirety and good traffic, and in the event that there's things trying to compromise those applications that we're publishing, for example, SQL, SQL injection attacks, anything that's trying to break into those web platforms that are potentially vulnerable, and the load balancer is taking care of those and reporting those issues to the admins that are looking after these for remediation. The other thing that we also have is an ability to build in some form of compliance. So PCI DSS here, it may be that you want to secure inbound and outbound traffic to make sure it meets policies and certain standards. You can leverage some content inspection tooling here for that purpose. So the zero trust use case, so again, just to sort of switch into and just idealizing how do we do this. And I've got 3 security zones there, zone 1, 2, and 3, ranging from least to most trusted entities within the organization. So the least trusted may be a third-party environment, it may be a contractor, it may be somebody that's accessing these from an external source. And what I want to do is to publish the same level of detail, i.e. the application servers, through the load balancer, but I want to restrict what each of these different segments of the network can or can't do. And in here, in security zone 1, on this particular IP range, I can gain access to those real servers, but the only thing that I can do through the confines of the load balancer is to do a GET request to bucket 1 in this example. And security zone 2 is a little bit more flexible, and I can do a GET and a PUT, but again, it's only to bucket 1. So that might be that it's external users coming from a trusted entity, but they are not necessarily third-party users, but they are users that may only need access to, again, a specific part of the environment, but they need that little bit more versatility here. And then security zone 3 may be the fact that it's all internal users, and we've got a lot of security around the houses there, and we can see exactly who's going what and doing what and where. But the outcome here is the fact that I'm using the load balancer to publish the application across 3 different subnets with 3 different desired outcomes. That means I've only got to configure this in one place, and if any of those policies need to change, I can do that in a single place, single source of truth, as opposed to across all of those storage objects or storage platforms behind. And that might be 3, it might be 10, it might be 20, it may be tens of servers that this could be done. It doesn't have to be storage, it could be a web application, it could be some other form of workload here. Just in terms of the multi-network segment publishing as well, I've seen all too often in certain spaces where IP addresses are limited in those segments. It would be a massive upheaval to get those segments moved around and uplifted to give them even a handful of new IP addresses. So what we can do is to publish load balancers in each of those segments, or virtual services in each of those segments that will accommodate users in those spaces. And safe to say that even with the inclusion of things like high availability, we only need a small amount of IP addresses. That means that we can publish those services and leverage other functions of the load balancer and for providing things like failover. So even if you're restricted on the number of IP addresses, as long as we meet the minimum criteria here, then we can provide those types of solutions for publishing multi-networks within those environments. The enablement of cloud and multi-cloud applications, what we've got to think about here is this sort of hybrid stance. I start with Azure today, I've moved some of the stuff to Azure tomorrow, and what does cloud and that integration in cloud and on-premises look like tomorrow, next year, next 5 years ahead? Nobody can sort of plan and predict what's happening. I'm seeing customers come in from a cloud repatriation service where they've moved to cloud 2, 3, 4 years ago. It's become too expensive, too cumbersome, and things have changed within the organization. And they've wanted to repatriate that data back onto those organizations. So load balancing absolutely can form as part of that cross-function to enable you to move those services uninterrupted whilst getting things repatriated, but also publish them securely. So wherever they reside, whether that's in a multi-cloud facet or whether that's in a hybrid facet, we can provide that seamless capability. And the automation allows you to increase and decrease those number of servers, and as part of the API, we can take instructions from those other devices that as things change, we can instruct the ability to add or remove those servers as you see fit. We can also use the containerized applications perspective. So we have a Kubernetes play here for any customer that's using that containerization method where they may want to secure and publish component parts of those applications, and it may be that you have web applications that are in their entirety individual components, but then being published to the outside world in that containerized form. It just looks like a single application. So the load balancer can be used to help manifest some good posture there in terms of availability. And as an API gateway as well, we can also be used and configured for a secure point of access for multiple APIs. So we can provide access to those API environments where we can restrict which APIs can be called upon, and then we can route those API requests as a result. So there's an element of security, there's an element of publishing, and there's also a stronghold in terms of publishing and availability there. So just in terms of how do we fit in those organizations where I want to leverage layer 3, layer 4, or layer 7 load balancing or combinations thereof. The GSLB service is part and parcel of the LoadMaster, and it's licensed based on our licensing tiers. So we have 3 tiers today. It's standard, enterprise, enterprise plus. Enterprise plus gives you everything. Anything south of that, there are certain restrictions on some of those functions. But with Enterprise Plus, you get GSLB service, you get web application firewall, you get the edge security pack, and access to the things that I've mentioned previously. In the advent that I want to provide a failover service for whatever the application, whatever the protocol, and GSLB in the terms of DNS would be the first place to start, and single namespace would point at 3 of those entities. So I have site A, site B, and site C, and we can prioritize, or we can distribute those loads as you see fit. So if the priority is site A always first because that's the primary site, great. But in the advent of something failing, what do I want to do? Do I want to fail to site B, site C? Do I want to load balance between those sites for B and C because they're on a smaller magnitude? We can do all things. And so when it comes to effectively load balancing these applications and protocols, we are in control of those functions, both at layer 3, layer 4, and layer 7. Safe to say that most customers in the layer 4 space would use the load balancer as a fringe solution there. Not many of my customers over the years have used layer 4 purely and simply because there's some significant caveats around the application with things like default gateways and whatever. But let's not get into those weeds today. More than happy to have those conversations as a follow-up if needed. But the use case here, and site A being the primary, site B being a backup or a DR site, or even 2 active data centers, we can leverage active or active passive scenarios in those scenarios as well. So we cover all bases in terms of business continuity and disaster recovery. So what does this all look like? And in terms of the web user interface, very intuitive. Not going to spend too much time today just drilling into this, but everything that you see down the left-hand side is all ClickOps driven. Fill in the blanks, fill in the gaps, and hopefully everything lights up green at the end of this. and we've made it as simple as possible so that we have virtual services. Those virtual services are attributed to those applications and those workloads that you want to publish. It has a VIP, and that VIP is a virtual IP that is tethered to the outside of the load balancer, and ultimately it is an ingress point to those applications that you want to publish. We then have real services or real servers we assign and align to those virtual IPs, and the middle bits around things like SSL offloading and health checks and all of these other things that I've mentioned earlier, and they're just going to form part of the load balancing equation here, looking at the algorithms that are used, looking at the security aspects that are used, and even down to those layer 7 health checks. So it's safe to say that whatever you see in here, it's a world-class solution. It's ultimately exactly what you would need in 99.9% of those scenarios where I want to publish, secure, and deliver those applications through the role of the load balancer, and then couple that with some content switching, some clever stuff in terms of certificates and management of those certificates. We can certainly make sure that whatever you're trying to achieve in terms of publishing and securing those applications is all done through this single lens of the user interface. The other added benefit of working with us here at Progress is because we've got some parity between our other systems, our other solutions, and LoadMaster has been expanded out to include the Flowmon Flowmon side of things here. So Flowmon is a network performance monitoring and diagnostics tool, but it also gives you an element of security in terms of anomaly detection. So that is looking for things like ransomware protection. And if you think about the role of the load balancer here, why would I not want some visibility and saying, and here's what's coming through the load balancer, here's what folks are trying to access. So Flowmon with this telemetry allows you to light up what we classify as a probe. That probe is a sensor within the confines of LoadMaster. That sensor is delivering flow-based information into what we call a collector. So yes, there is an additional charge for a collector, but as a monitoring, visibility, and a security tool set, you'll find it difficult to find something that brings all of these things together in a single source of truth. What I will state here is the bigger the picture, the better the story. If I only light up the services that I'm publishing through the LoadMaster, and then what we see coming in and out of that device is rules we will report on. So there may be opportunities to deploy additional probes in the heart of the network to be able to get this bigger picture story. So, and rest assured that we've got a finger on the pulse on the critical stuff, but it's safe to say that you wouldn't just put an alarm bell on the outside wall of the house and say, hey, I'm protected. All of these are the sensors, all of these are the monitors, these are the widgets that you'll see, and having a deeper look at Flowmon would give you that opportunity to close that security gap. Just in terms of LoadMaster 360 as well, as I mentioned at the start of the presentation around the portfolio, LoadMaster 360 is a SaaS-based platform. So for those customers that want to leverage some form of dashboard, some form of tool set that gives me an insight into what's going on my estate, and LoadMaster 360 with that SaaS offering, now we will have a dark site offering at some stage where if you're in the MOD as an example where there's no internet access and whatever else, we will have a standalone air-gapped version at some stage in the coming months. But this is for customers that can tether their LoadMasters to what we call a connector. That connector makes an outbound request to our SaaS platform to deliver that detail. And this is an add-on, it's a package that we can deliver as additional cost, but ultimately those insights will look across the estate, and you can package that up in a variety of different forms to look at that estate based on virtual services, groups of services, groups of load balancers, groups of sites, etc. So, and in terms of what constitutes an asset, that asset could be just a single standalone virtual IP, or it could be a virtual IP that's tied to 10, 20, 30 servers, or it could be a bunch of services tied to a bunch of virtual IPs tied to a bunch of servers. So, and you can get clever with this sort of stuff to give you those insights, and whatever we report on then will give you the availability or in some cases lack of availability because there's things that fail, and ultimately those reports will allow you to make good and better business decisions going forward. So just as a high-level view, LoadMaster connects to a connector. The connector connects outbound to LoadMaster 360. So yes, we can lock this down to ports and protocols in use at the 360 connector level, and so that you can only allow the connector to connect to our services through your firewall, so that we can a bit of peace of mind here. We want to make sure that whatever we're sending out, one, the integrity of that data is maintained, and if you need to know, what list of information is sent, I can certainly get that updated to you and over. But literally, there's only a handful of connections, and whatever is sent to us, and it's information that you can use to make those better decisions within those network entities. So the three key takeaways: it's there to improve application availability, and if we have a multitude of load balancers, load masters out there in the field, and I want to provide that single source of truth rather than having to log into each of these load balancers individually or wait for those alerts to come in to say, hey, here's something wrong. Ultimately, LoadMaster 360 delivers this through that single pane of glass. It will also simplify the hybrid and multi-cloud operations, so that in terms of capacity planning and that service delivery management, it's giving you the full visibility and control to look at those systems, even though they may be disparate from an on-premises scenario. And the key benefit there is to be able to accelerate the issue resolution. When it becomes a shin-kicking exercise of where does the problem lie, this analysis and the root cause visibility that we provide gives you the opportunity to reduce that time to resolution and ultimately get the users on their way consuming those services. So in essence, we've almost come to the end of today's session. Just in terms of the wrap up, and there's a summary use case that I wanted to just touch on, and this was a well-known university in the heart of England, not far from me, and they formed just before the turn of the millennium there, and they amalgamated a number of training colleges, and that amalgamation provided some significant challenges over the years, both for previous encounters with the university and current ones. They've got around 13,000 students, around 3,500 staff there or thereabouts, give or take, and using a variety of applications and workloads. The university, spanning several continents, which was one of the additional challenges that we faced. They're not just a UK-centric organisation. So it's safe to say that what security and scalability areas they needed to span multiple time zones, multiple workloads, multiple teams, multiple entities here. That meant that they needed something that was centric around those applications, but also a single source of truth for support, and which throats they could choke in terms of support when needed around the globe. So they chose the Kemp LoadMaster, Progress Kemp LoadMaster over the years for that, and we've done multiple different deployments inside the heart of this university, and so those applications that are critical to the organisation stay always on. These academic databases using single sign-on, they were clunky, they were lumpy and at best in their early forms, and being able to use the load balancer to be that single all-seeing eye into that application, meanwhile being able to secure it with single sign-on and things like the web application firewall were the key. So it helped with increasing the system performance, because we're taking care of some of the legwork here. We provided this at a best value for money perspective, as well as reducing their total cost of ownership and reducing the complexity, because wherever these services and these servers sat, safe to say that whether that was a hardware requirement or in some of the other data centers that were leveraging a virtual platform, we could put a solution together that meant whatever the need was fulfilled through the LoadMaster brand. So that's one of the use cases. For any of you that are on the call today or listening back in on the web feed, ultimately, and again, lots of different use cases. Let's talk about what it is that absolute requirement is, and see if we can engineer a solution that is fit for what you need it to do. So my pre-sales team are always on hand in terms of getting creative, looking at what those opportunities are to position for success here, and we're more than willing to help. So how do we help? And just lastly from me, we can qualify what it is that you're looking for, and we've got content that will help you with aligning and assigning your needs to justify that within the organization to your powers and your peers. And we can do some discovery, we can do some pre-sales discovery to determine what's the size and what's the scope of this, what are the SLAs that you need to achieve, what are those business continuity metrics in the advent of a site failing or a service failing, what do they look like? So these are all of the things that through that pre-sales discovery we can then do, and we can provide you with a proposal. So if there's an RFP, an RFI, or some form of proposal that's required here, we can absolutely work with you to go through that process as well through the sales and engineering teams. And in the event that we need to prove our worth here, just to satisfy those minds where you may not have seen the brand before, and given the fact that we've been in this game for 23, 24 years plus, and load balancing has been something at the heart of what we do on a day-to-day basis. So if you need to do something more than just get your hands on a free bit of software, let's engage and let's work with you to your advantage. Let's put the meat around the bones and see the proof in the pudding. So we can certainly work together for that. Lastly, we have a bunch of professional services that will work in a variety of different capacities for project services, audit services if you've inherited a LoadMaster estate, you're new to the organization or recently new to the organization, and you already have LoadMaster in play, and we cover a lot of bases in a lot of those areas, for Blue Light, for education, for an MOD and NHS services as an example. So if you're dubious about what this thing is doing for you, those audit services maybe something that you can use to your advantage. And we can also do some training and installation services as well. So if you need us to do that legwork, or you want to do the legwork and once things are in play, we can certainly train and enable you for that. So lastly, before we jump quickly into any questions with Libby, the resources and the templates are free to use, and you can download them through this. So I'd urge you to gain access to this, have a look and satisfy those burning desires or those and little inquisitions as to, is this fit for purpose? Is this right for me? Are we hedging the right bets here? I would absolutely I'll get you to download that software. And lastly, I mentioned LoadMaster at the start of this. Why would I want somebody intelligently distributing the load around my network? If I don't do my job as a LoadMaster today, and I'm on that plane, this is the detriment to the users that are sat on that plane by loading and that plane inadvertently with the wrong algorithms, the wrong maths being used. We're sitting 3, 4, 5 feet off the ground now, and it's an uncomfortable experience, albeit short-lived, but it will generate some form of an inquiry here. What happened? What went wrong? And this is exactly the sort of things that you will be expected to deliver in terms of those applications. So LoadMaster is a great choice in terms of being able to mathematically direct those services and servers to those real servers in conjunction with what you're doing on the network. So Libby, I guess it's back to you, but thank you all for taking the time today to be with us. I hope it's been of interest, and for the folks that are joining retrospectively, again, feel free to reach out to the team and we'll certainly answer any questions that you have. So Libby, back to you if there's any questions.
That is great. Thanks, Carl. We do have a couple of questions, so we'll squeeze them in. So one question is LoadMaster difficult to set up and manage if we don't have a dedicated network management team?
No, I mean, it's like any network device. It has an interface and it's intuitive. As I've mentioned, the templates and the deployment guides, if there's anything specific or let's say vertical specific that you're concerned about and you're not quite sure how to do this, then again, support and pre-sales are on hand to be able to satisfy that and scratch that itch as well. So I'd say, no, it's not difficult. I've had customers that have used LoadMaster in the past, and within a few hours of being driven around the UI, they've quickly determined what's how to drive this thing. So no, it's really intuitive.
Brilliant, thank you. For public sector teams with limited budget, is LoadMaster a cost-effective solution compared to other options?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the sort of typical price tags of the market leaders, and looking at the quadrants for this space, even though it's a and a little long in the tooth for that type of thing. And when you look at the leaders in that space, they're 3 to 5 times the price, usually based on MSRP, and it always becomes that sort of discounting exercise to get in budget for that type of scenario. What I will say is, Progress LoadMaster gives us that absolute opportunity to reduce the total cost of ownership whilst maintaining an enterprise grade load balancing solution, so you're not compromising those features just because you're not choosing that market leading #1 brand. So then we're #3 in that space, behind the likes of F5 and Citrix, far more cost effective in terms of acquisition, but ultimately, because of the licensing and the flexibility, we can get as creative as you need to be, and in terms of closing that gap. So I would definitely urge you to see on a comparative basis what that bang for buck looks like.
Brilliant, thank you. And then finally, is it possible to run LoadMaster 360 as on-prem because of regularity?
Not at this stage. As I said in part of this, and there is going to be a dark site version or an air-gapped version at some stage. So if this is something that is a burning desire and you absolutely need it, we just need to keep raising the awareness with the team to prioritize and getting things finished there. So ultimately, and because it's a SaaS-based offering, it's hosted in our platforms within our environments that we gain and give access to those customers. So, if there is a compromise, if there is a workaround, we can certainly look what that would need to be. We do have other tool sets in our portfolio that can manage and monitor applications and devices, such as things like WhatsUp Gold as an example. And there's integrations into LoadMaster there. So if it needs to be on dark sites or air-gapped sites, we would probably go down the route of things like WhatsUp Gold for the short term. But then once Kemp 360 and the LoadMaster 360 brand comes into view for an air-gapped perspective, then we can certainly move towards that as well.
That's great, thank you, Carl.
Any further questions?
Nope, that's it.
Perfect. If not, then I wish you all a great rest of the day ahead, and thanks for taking the time today. It is much appreciated. And wherever you are in the world, I hope the sun's shining and blue skies ahead. But thanks for taking the time.